Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. I have with me on this podcast Martin Preib. He is a retired Chicago police officer, but he is also a writer, and he writes for the Chicago Contrarian. And I asked him to come on because he wrote this incredible article just recently called "New Chicago Mayor Proves the Windy City is Ground Zero for the Revolution." And he goes into quite some detail because within just weeks of getting inaugurated, who did Mayor Brandon Johnson decide to sit down? None other than Angela Davis. She is a feminist, Marxist, radical. Basically, she sold guns that were ended up being involved in a murder. She's somebody on the same realm as Weather Underground people like Bill Ayers and Bernadette Dorn. These are radical Marxists. These are actual domestic terrorists, not the J6er type. And he wrote this incredible article. Martin, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
So you seem to be the only person who picked up on the fact that Brandon Johnson, one of his first major interviews, is done with Angela Davis. Tell us a little bit more about what you uncover in your article and why you think this happened.
Well, I think that Brandon Johnson and the progressive movement in Chicago is deeply connected and sort of an outcome of the movement that Angela Davis was in part of beginning in the late 60s and early 70s. And along with a lot of the Weather Underground founding members, they're all on the same path of moving from the outside of the system into the inside of the system and having profound control over our institutions. And so I didn't think much of Johnson when he was running. I thought he posed a grave danger to the city and the country. And I didn't think Vallis was going to win. If I had time, I'd pour over the election, but I don't understand really what happened there. But I figured he was going to win because the progressives now completely own Chicago. You have Toni Preckwinkle, she owns the county. You have her lackey in Kim Foxx, the worst prosecutor in the country. You have, I think that they're sure they'll never get any harassment from the Federal Department of Justice with Merrick Garland in there. And I think they're going to put one of their people in as the U.S. attorney. The only spot they didn't completely control was the mayor. So now they've got it all pretty much locked up. And so for Johnson to sit down with Davis, I think it's a real statement of where this city's going to go and what we're in for. It's very.
Yes. You actually wrote Johnson revealed his bias and the prelude to Chicago's future shortly after winning election. It was an announcement that Johnson would be the guest of in a conversation with Dr. Angela Davis. It's a hard time. She's not a real doctor. A longtime radical university professor from California. And this is the funny thing is the discussion was entitled "Freedom, Dreams, and Chicago's Future." If our future looks like Angela Davis's past, we have a lot to be afraid of. I mean, she was Marxist, feminist, political activist, philosopher, academic author. She's a professor. She was the founding a member of the Committee of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism. She's a longtime member of the Communist Party of the USA. She was active in the Occupy movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign. More importantly, she sold weapons that eventually ended up, killing people. And she kind of got off on that charge after being in prison for a year. But why would anybody sit down with a person of this type when you are the mayor of the third largest city in the United States? It's because you ideologically agree with her, and that is a scary proposition.
Oh, it is. It's absolutely scary. But I mean, this has been going on a long time. I mean, Obama was buddies with Dorn and Ayers, and
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. They promoted Obama.
yeah,
Right.
they were in his living room when he announced for one of his campaigns. So they've been able to recreate themselves in the public imagination largely through the demise of the media in this country. The media, I think, before the mid '60s and '70s sort of saw itself as the protector of the republic, but I think it slowly moved into sort of an antagonist of the republic, and it just started to buy into the notion that America is essentially a evil place that can't escape its historical injustices, and
Mhm.
a lot of these radicals moved into journalism. They moved into education, journalism, and the law. And they worked very hard. They campaigned. They fought for every little battle, every little policy, and they creeped deeper and deeper into our institutions, mostly in Chicago. Dorn and Ayers, when they beat their charges and everything, they all came back to Chicago. Dorn went to Northwestern University. I mean, can you imagine she's teaching kids in the law school or the law department? Uh,
It's frightening.
it
Bill
is, but
Ayers has a public pension, for heaven's sakes, after serving at the University of Illinois, in Chicago.
yes, it's. But you know, it happened with very little opposition. You know, everybody just kind of shrugged their shoulders. And I write very extensively about the wrongful conviction movement, and I write that there's an immense amount of evidence that many of these guys, that particularly Kimberly Fox is letting out of prison, are 100% guilty of their crimes and were not abused by the police. I think many police officers have been falsely accused of coercing confessions. And I believe that so many of these cases that are winding themselves through the courts uh, have an immense amount of evidence. But uh, when the media is trumpeting them and refusing to look at the evidence that these are bogus exonerations, the money that they've foisted from the city through settlements has really funded the radical left. This is a major funding source for the radical left. And if you look around the country, these organizations and schools all around the country are starting everywhere, and they're making similar arguments about the police. They've basically turned criminals into folk heroes and police into criminals. And
So
go ahead.
yeah, so no, your point is well taken, that the media has not done its job, and it's and, and have they did they ignore your this whole sit down with Angela Davis? Did they report on it at all?
Oh no, there was like mentioning of it, but there was no like, uh, there was nobody asking why is this guy sitting down with Angela Davis. I mean,
And then
it's
bringing up her entire background. I mean, this is a woman, for example, that has connections to Jim Jones. Everybody
yes,
remembers what he did in killing over 900 people. So, and then nothing was said about that.
right.
No connections made.
Yeah, there was a long battle between Davis and Ronald Reagan when he was governor. I mean, he Reagan was really focused on who these people were. Reagan and Nixon both knew what this movement was about, and they fought it as much as they could. And Reagan tried desperately to get her tenure canceled so that she couldn't teach, but he wasn't able to do it because in the late '60s and early '70s, so many of these radicals became like celebrities in the media, and they were able to.
Angela Davis, though, she was a celebrity in the communist countries.
Yes,
Immediately
she
she gets
was.
out of prison, she goes to the Soviet Union. She's celebrated and feted by the East Germans. She goes to Cuba, where they, essentially throw parades for her. I
Yes,
mean, this is who she is, and this is who Brandon Johnson makes one of his first major interviews with,
yeah.
somebody who is feted by the communist regimes around the world.
That's true. And right around the same time he did this interview, he announced these new positions he's putting in. And one is the deputy mayor of public safety. And the guy he appointed has the full resume of the anti-police, rhetoric. And it was a major announcement that, if you thought it was bad being a cop the last couple of years, what's coming is just going to be, it was coming for the Chicago police is it's kind of, it's mind boggling. And really, there's not much. I'm glad you're doing this interview and looking at this and talking about this because, you know, over the course of this, I was outraged by what these people were doing, but I also became so disappointed by the conservatives and
Mhm.
their unwillingness to, get to work, and now they're starting to with the House and everything. But
So here at Breakthrough Ideas, we believe that information is powerful, and so we're about distributing the information to as many people who are listening and waking people up to the truth. And so, I wouldn't say that we're necessarily considered alternate media yet, but we are doing these interviews because I believe, given the right information, the majority of people will make the more common sense vote when it comes to voting time. And look, if we don't win elections, we can't change policy. and policy matters. It affects everybody's lives, and at the end of the day, it's the people in power who are making these policy choices on us, and we have got to win elections, which requires a lot more information going to the voters, and I appreciate Chicago Contrarian. I wanna talk to that about the towards the end of the conversation. I kinda wanna get back to this whole thing with policing because you just saw this weekend 9 killed, 40 shot. Now, most people focus on like, well, 9 killed, and this was just a normal weekend. Last weekend, the holiday weekend, you had 12 killed, over 50 shot, and that was on par with 8 years ago, 2015 at the high. I mean, we're at for that particular weekend in time. Um, so now you go to a normal weekend, 9 shot, 40 ki no, I'm sorry, 40 shot, 9 killed. Think about that, 40 people were shot in Chicago. I think we're so numb to it at this point, we don't really think that I mean, that is if that were happening, I don't know, I guess in Kosovo, for example, which there's things that are heating up right now, it would be sort of international news.
Yes,
It
I think you're right that it's just becomes they're trying to it's status quo, and I think there's an excellent media outlet named
Oh,
CWB.
yeah.
But I don't think if CWB wasn't out there, they would really be glossing this over.
Mhm.
And you'll notice that every time there's a huge explosion and shooting, especially in the summer, right away some of these media people come out with some kind of loony police reform stories. I mean, clearly, clearly, the gang members in Chicago do not fear the police. You can see that by the crime statistics. But as far as driving policy in elections, they've also made tremendous inroads in the election processes.
Yes.
I think we saw that in the last few elections. It's going to take a tremendous amount of work to restore some integrity back to our elections. And the left is very well organized, very well financed. They've been doing this for 50 years, and they know what they're doing. And the right has not really come together to take it on just yet. I think you're right about so-called alternate media. It's springing up everywhere. These great
Mhm.
media sources all over the place because the public distrust in the media is at an all-time low, and
Yep.
that's to me one of the most dire things. Nobody's believing what the media is saying, and the media, I think one of their goals is they attack and drown out any voices that contradict them. So when somebody emerges who's saying what they don't want to hear, they go after. They go after him like you wouldn't. I mean, you look at Trump. I mean, they just they're very aggressive. They're very nasty people.
Oh, listen, I've been the brunt of some of that,
Oh, I'm sure
vitriol
you
by the
have.
media.
Yeah,
So,
no doubt.
yeah, I'm used to it. I've been called every name under the book. They don't even wanna look at the policy details about why I have said what I said. They don't go past a talking point, and then they label you, and they move on, and they just continue to label you. I mean, none of it's true. If you could have a reasonable policy discussion with individual voters, you will win them over to our side.
Yes,
They
yes.
just don't know what they don't know because the media lies to them, the politicians lie to them, they don't know what to believe. Let's move on to a couple other really hot topics that came up. First of all, this idea that peacekeepers are going to be beneficial at all. I mean, you've had 2 weekends now where supposedly peacekeepers are in effect, and you've had record, shootings.
Yes, this is they do this quite often,
But
and
they're spending tax money to do this. It's complete nonsense. Where is the accountability?
well, I think Gina. I mean, do they really want this to stop? I mean, a lot of people who voted for people like Kimberly Fox, they're starting to see the outcome of that, and they're
Mhm.
starting to regret it. So, making the city unlivable for a lot of people, they're going to move. And I think they're gonna. I think they're looking to control big cities. They're trying to look to control
Sure.
big cities because they want the electoral votes for the entire state.
Yes.
And when they camp out in the big cities and own the big cities, they really have a power structure there. So, I mean, the outrage over the shootings, I think they feel that they can navigate that and that they can sort of hold off the outrage to that. And well, they
Well,
have
yeah,
so far.
yeah.
I mean,
Well,
how
and a
long
lot of
is this going to
time
go on? You
yeah.
know?
Yeah, no, a lot of time too, crime is a personal issue, right? "Well, I feel safe in my little
Right.
neighborhood." And
Right.
unless it's affected me or my neighbor, I'm like, "Oh, well, things seem fine here. I don't know what's going on there. It's just crazy town over there, but, whatever, I'm good here." Not realizing that, no, 40 people being shot is a real problem, and it's a real detriment. You've just and there's a business impact on all that. Business is obviously down. Vacancy are very high for retail and office space in Chicagoland. It's gonna come full swing. I wanna talk to you about another bill that was not highlighted again by the media as it was going through the legislative process, and that is the fact that they voted both, unfortunately, Republicans and Democrats. Republicans, all but I think 7 Republicans in the Illinois House. So that means 33 Republicans voted for voted to allow non-citizens to become fully, fledged police officers.
Yeah, well, it's a war on police, and they're looking at every angle they can get to diminish the power of police and the police to actually fight crime. And
Yeah, but
that's
think about this. Think about this. Police have arrest power. They are different from the military. So we've had non-citizens go into the military. There's a stricter chain of command. There's stricter controls, in my opinion. They don't have arrest power over citizens. None of that happens. Now you have non-citizens, and I don't care if they're here in a legal status, whether they're DACA, green card, permanent resident, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. They are not citizens, and they're allowed now to arrest citizens. That is a power that you cannot, it's a foundational power that you cannot just give to anyone, in my opinion. And that bill passed. I think the governor, I don't think, has signed it yet, but um, I know that the reason they're doing this is, well, we have a police shortage, without looking at why do you have a police shortage.
well, that's true. I mean, one of the reasons I retired when I did was that uh, so many of the veteran cops really, it takes a long time to learn how to be a police officer. It takes a long time, and it takes a long time to learn a neighborhood.
Sure.
And so many of the veteran officers were so fed up with all this anti-police stuff, they're retiring. So there's not a lot of guys out, as many guys out there to teach the young officers. So a lot of the young officers who come up in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, they're not really getting the experience and the training that we received. And so that's been a major hit on the police. And
Mhm.
we used to do a lot of traffic stops, but now people don't want to do traffic stops. That was a great way to fight crime, was traffic stops.
Mhm.
So they're going to use the fact that they've made policing so unattractive to good candidates to justify bringing in people. And you don't know who these guys are. You don't really know their background if they're immigrants. Do they know the Constitution? Do they know the Bill of Rights? Do they know the key rulings that govern what a police officer can do and can't do? Uh, but you started to see this in the police department before I left. A lot of the veteran guys were like, I don't like what's happening. I better get out of here. And this is all part of the anti-police movement. I mean, it, policing is where the war for the progressives is focused. It's
Sure. Okay, so that's a good point. They've taken over education. They've taken over many places of bureaucracy.
media. They
They've
take,
taken over media. They've taken over, our law, in many cases. You have a lot of lawyers, unfortunately, are super liberals, and now they're going after police departments. That is their
well,
next inroad, would you say?
yes, but I think it sort of started first with the police, and
Oh,
and then moved into. I mean, they go after judges now. If
mhm.
judges don't go their way, they're really good at getting them kicked off the bench. Uh, Now they're going after prosecutors. You see all the prosecutors leaving Kimberly Fox's office. All the
Yes.
veterans, they're all writing these letters of how what a nightmare it is. I don't think she could care less. I think she's happy to see him go because she's trying to fundamentally recreate the prosecutor's office as an agent to the anti-police movement. It's a long story, and I'm writing a book about it, but a lot of it goes back to the Nixon administration, and they learned early on that if you vilify the police, all kinds of positive benefits can happen to the radical left. I don't think even they understood how lucrative it was going to be this industry of suing police officers.
So
Uh,
so going back a little bit, I mean, go back to the Nixon administration, go back to Weather Underground, go back to these folks like Bill Ayers, Bernadette Dorn, and my favorite, which I haven't talked about on this for a while, but James Kilgore. James Kilgore was, he was. He's a convicted American felon. He was a former fugitive. He was with the Symbionese Liberation Army. He participated in the murder of a bank teller. He then took the identity of a dead 10-month-old and fled to Africa for 26 years. The law finally caught up with him. He was prosecuted, put in jail for 6 years, came out of that. And lo and behold, what did he do? He became an adjunct professor at the University of Illinois, which I railed against. And I actually was on Fox News about this when I was in the legislature. But I mean, he's another perfect example of these folks who are actual literal domestic terrorists. And domestic terrorism itself is it's violence for a political purpose. That's exactly what these folks are. And they got away with it. And now we have a two-tier system when it comes to quote unquote domestic terrorism, quote unquote an insurrection. I mean, these are folks who participated in the killing of judges, the bombing of the Pentagon, the bombing of other government buildings. This is actual insurrection, and it's not unlike what we saw with Antifa attacking federal buildings during the George Floyd 2020 summer of riots. And yet they are getting away with it. They're not called domestic terrorists. They're not prosecuted in the same way that these J6ers have been. We have a two-tier justice system. The whole Trump scandal proves that, the whole collusion, the hoax, all of that stuff. And it is a scary proposition to be in front of people that don't see what's going on. These folks have control over who they prosecute, who they don't prosecute. I mean, you just see the attack on parents going to school board meetings, the attack on pro-lifers outside of outside of Planned Parenthoods. We have got to figure this out.
well, you're absolutely right, and I've been writing about it. I wrote two books about key cases in which showed how these people have moved into the criminal justice system, and I've written for the Contrarian extensively about it. It's going to require, though, nobody has more energy and more focus than a fanatic. Fanatics
Yeah.
they're just nonstop, and they will turn any argument upside down. And the problem is that the right is not, fanatics the way these people are. And it's going to take a lot of focus and a lot of energy. And I don't see that the right is unified enough right now to truly, I mean, there's good things happening with the House and there's some good things
Mhm.
happening with the media, but I'm not optimistic about the future of the country at all. I mean, I hate to be so bleak, but I'm not optimistic about things in this country. I think they've moved so deeply into things that even if Trump were to get reelected or whatever, it's they are so deeply embedded into this country that it's going to take many. It'll take 20 years to just rebuild the Chicago Police Department to actually effectively protect the citizens of Chicago, and that would require so many things coming together that are just not on the horizon. It's true for the country as well. I mean, I hate to be so bleak, but that's just the way I see it.
Well, I think that's partly because we are, we're pretty much informed. We read about this, we care about it, we write about it, speak about it, and we want to raise awareness about it. That's our job, our mission. I believe we are feel the same way that way. But we live in Chicago, where we don't see a whole lot of hope. And my position on all that is that yeah, sure, Chicago's going to be a disaster. Brandon Johnson's major interview is with this radical. I mean, she's a communist.
Well,
I mean, that's scary, but so I think our country's gonna be saved by red states.
what
That's the only way path forward is to be saved by states that show a better example and teach them, the errors of their ways.
I think that's what happened. I remember Pat Buchanan wrote in several of his books that there'll be a balkanization of America where people will move to
Mhm.
separate parts of the country based on their political ideology. But you know, the I hope you're right. I mean, I really hope you're right. But what happened was from 1965 up until now, what happened with the left, what people call Marxism, is Marxist doctrine assumed that the workers would come take over, and and for a long time, the Marxists and the radicals tried to convince the workers, but the workers in America had it pretty good, and they turned their back on them. So what these Marxists did was they left all that behind. Instead of controlling the means of production, they worked to control the means of communication. And that is where they've been so adept in moving into corrupting the youth in the universities and the education system, corrupting the media, corrupting the court system. And so they're very effective at controlling the message and the narrative. And it's kind of a strange thing that they're often most successful with the more educated people. I mean,
Yes,
the
yes,
more
yes,
educated people
absolutely.
buy these narratives, but working class people, they're sort of like they have a sort of cynicism about the party line or the media narratives. So
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because they live in reality. They know how they work and know how things are produced and do things, and they're not just, off on some sort of, educational island. They actually have to make a living doing real things, and so they and so it is the educated classes that are the buffoons, honestly, in these conversations. And I'm not afraid to call them what they are because that's what's happening. So, okay, so Martin, let's tidy it up here a little bit. So I would say now the mayor essentially has zero credibility on crime after sitting down with Angela Davis, an actual domestic terrorist. And he has zero credibility. She bought the weapons that were used in a murder, which is exactly what they all decry is happening. Oh, you got these straw purchases happening. Okay, well, you have zero credibility on anything to do with gun control, anything to do with crime because you sat down with Angela Davis. That would be my first thing. And then second thing, could you tell us more about the books that you've written and about Chicago Contrarian and your website for Chicago Contrarian? Because there's a lot of good information. You have a variety of writers. Just give us a little bit of background on that.
sure, Chicago Contrarian was founded by a gentleman named Florian and myself, and it's at chicagocontrarian.com. I write a lot about criminal justice, but he writes a lot about education. We have some other really talented writers there, and we've got a good, solid readership, and I think it's well written and well edited. And I've written 3 books. Uh, uh, you can find them on crookedcity.org. Uh, One of my titles of my book is called Crooked City. It's about Chicago and the criminal justice system. It's very well reviewed. It played a key role in undermining one of the key murder cases in Chicago history. And then I have another one called Burn Patterns, which is about an arson case. It's very well reviewed. My first book is about hauling dead bodies to the morgue, a collection of essays about doing that called The Wagon and Other Stories from the City. That was published by University of Chicago Press. Um, and I've done a lot of writing, and I used to be the second vice president of the FOP for 3 years, and that's that's generally my little biography.
Well, thank you so much, Martin. This has been really informative. Thank you for writing about things that other people have ignored. I hope this podcast gets wide play, and I hope people start to. Can they subscribe to Chicago Contrarian? Do you send them an email, or do you just go to the website and find the latest publication?
Yeah, we have a subscription, and I think people who are really interested in how Chicago works and how the left is working Chicago would might find my book Crooked City interesting. So if they're
Okay.
interested. It's on Amazon.
All right. Go and order Crooked City on Amazon by Martin Preib. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate the conversation today.